The Seahawks have yet to solve the Matthew Stafford curse as the Rams come into town and steal a 6-point overtime win. A sloppy performance by the Seahawks once again. We're going to be breaking it all down here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our post-game show by my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, whether you're in nearby Bremerton, Washington, or you're over in Providence, Rhode Island. We appreciate each and every one of you. The Seahawks had a prime opportunity to move back above 500 today. The Rams gave them every chance to win the game at Lumen Field, but the Seahawks found a way to squander it in overtime, losing 26-20. They dropped to 4-5 and are officially in last place now in the NFC West. 4 consecutive losses at Lumen Field. There's a number of different directions we could go discussing how this game went wrong. And that's really kind of the problem with this football team right now is on all 3 phases. They just can't put everything together and they can't stop hurting themselves. This was truly a game. Look, not to take anything away from the Rams. The Rams played well in the second half. They made the plays when they needed to, but this was another game. It was about the Seahawks beating themselves. They did it on offense. They did it on defense with penalties. And even on special teams, you had a missed opportunity with an extra point. They could have won the game at the end of regulation if they would have gotten that extra point, but they didn't block it properly. And they had 2 guys that were in the backfield immediately. Jason Myers ends up hooking the kick to his left. You name it, this team has just got issues on all 3 phases where they just cannot stop with these self-inflicted wounds.
Yeah, and it's brutal, Corbin, because you look at it, in their 5 losses this season, the Seahawks have 11 turnovers in those 5 losses. 7 of those have been on Geno Smith interceptions. And look, we're going to get to it, obviously, later in the show. We're going to talk about Geno specifically, and me, I'm not going to speak for you, Corbin, but I myself have been one of the biggest Geno defenders of anybody who is talking about the Seahawks in a medium like this. And this was one of those days where it was just, I understand the offensive line is struggling, and it's maybe one of the worst offensive lines we've seen the Seahawks actually field in an extremely long time. In my lifetime, it's probably the worst I've seen. But at the same time, you can't take the weight off of Geno Smith in this loss. I mean, there's some really bad throws. The latter 2 interceptions, just brutal. And the turnovers are what's killing this team, Corbin. It's absolutely brutalizing these games and putting them in just rough situations as they're trying to actually pull out wins in any way of an organized fashion. They're unable to do it. And it's so hard to watch. I mean, it's getting hard to watch. And again, I told you before the show, I don't want to be – there's a lot of positives here, and I don't want to be overwhelmingly negative because there is a lot of positives. The defense, for one, took huge steps in defending the run. A lot of the things we've been harping on for the past couple of weeks, Corbin, looked a lot better, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But there's just a couple things that are not coming together, especially for the offense. And it's hurting them down the stretch. And just the untimely turnovers in the red zone in places you have to capitalize if you want to win football games in the NFL. They're not doing that right now. And it really is hurting them in the back end of games. And you get into an overtime game and you can't pick up 1 yard on 2 tries when you put your heaviest set in the game. Mike McDonald was talking about it after the game, and he's like, great football teams pick up 1 yard on 2 tries. And he could not be more right about that. I'm glad Mike McDonald said that because, look, that is just a fact.
Yeah, what really makes this game frustrating, you mentioned it, the defense took a big step forward. I mean, the Rams averaged 2.8 yards per carry on the ground today. They didn't even get to 70 rushing yards. This was the best performance we've seen from the run defense all season, in my opinion, when you consider the opponent. They did an excellent job on that front. They were able to coax a turnover from Matthew Stafford. They didn't get a sack, but they had pressure on him in the first half. This is really what I thought the Bills game could have been in the first half with those missed opportunities that they had in the red zone last week against Buffalo. You and I talked about this on the show afterwards. they could have been ahead by 1 or 2 scores at the end of the first half in that game last week. This week, they actually got it done with a flurry of touchdowns, 2 touchdown passes from Geno Smith inside 2 minutes to play. The offense got untracked. They were throwing the ball downfield. They took advantage of a couple free play opportunities with offside penalties on the Rams, and Geno Smith made them pay. At that point, felt like this is going to be a pretty good winnable game for the Seahawks. It felt like they were in control. And then they come out in the second half and they pull a 180. They do what they did against the Buffalo Bills last week with not 1 but 2 red zone interceptions by Geno Smith. We'll have more of an opportunity to dive into those later in the show, but it's pretty safe to say Geno called it a 14-point swing after the game. This was a 21-point swing, in my opinion, because the Seahawks could have had touchdowns on both those drives that they were inside the 7-yard line of the Rams. They had first and goal, and they got no points to show for it. They also gave 7 to the Rams when Cameron Kinchens picked off the first one and returned it 106 yards for a score. I mean, that is a back-breaking pick 6. You take all that stuff out of the equation, not only should the Seahawks have won this game, and we were talking about in the press box, they should have won this one fairly handily with the way they played in the first half, the opportunities they had in the second half, and they just keep gift wrapping opportunities for opposing teams to steal games from them. And that's what happened. Again, not taking anything away from the Rams. They made the plays when they needed to. They executed, which the Seahawks did not. But at the end of the day, Mike Macdonald's team just cannot get out of its own way. They just keep hurting themselves with red zone miscues, penalties on defense. And I will admit it, there were a few of them called today that I thought were questionable. The Derek Hall roughing the passer penalty being one. I don't know what he's supposed to do when the quarterback is falling backwards on his own. I don't know what he's supposed to do in that play. But it was called, and they still held him to a field goal on that drive. They would have had a field goal probably with that penalty not being assessed. So ultimately, that didn't have that big of a bearing. But there were some other penalties called on Seattle's defense that ended up prolonging drives for the Rams and helped them tie the football game in the third quarter. And then you give them 7 points on offense when you were inside the 10-yard line. That just cannot happen. And just look at the last 2 games, Connor. We've had a muffed snap, which there was more of that today, but there was a muffed snap over Geno Smith's head last week. They got stuffed on 4th down when he was tripped up by his own offensive lineman, stepped on by his own offensive lineman. And then this week, 2 interceptions, and one of them was a pick 6. I mean, you can't win football games when you're doing that kind of stuff, especially a team like the Rams that is well coached and has a really talented football team. You can't make mistakes like that and expect to win. And it's just frustrating because the Seahawks made enough plays today to win this game, but they also, unfortunately, made enough plays to end up tripping up and giving it to the Rams. And that's ultimately what ended up happening.
In the first half, the offense just, I mean, we talk about the fact that the offense, it took until there was under a minute remaining in the first half for the offense to do anything, which, look, I love the fact that Geno Smith threw 2 touchdown passes within 43 seconds of the game clock. Okay, that's great. But you're not going to win football games like that every single week. And the lack of discipline from both Mike Macdonald's offense and Ryan Grubb's offense, obviously, as we know, Mike Macdonald is the head coach. It all comes back to him at the end of the day. But Ryan Grubb is obviously also the offensive coordinator of this team. The lack of discipline both by the offensive line, but in the motions, Corbin, you tweeted about it mid-game, just the motions, the timing is off. Something is just off about this offense. Everything is not clicking the way it should be at this point in the season. And you talked about the penalties on defense too, Corbin, but there was a lot on offense as well. I mean, the offensive line, the false starts, everything else. I know Geno Smith got a lot of free plays out of the Rams defense, which is great. If you negate those, we might even be looking at a much different game than what we got. But there's so many things that you can look at that are coachable moments, and you have to assume during the bye. I mean, they needed this bye week, Corbin, in week 5, right? With the injuries and the setbacks and everything else that was happening this season so far. This bye week was too late because they needed a reset. The Seahawks needed a reset a while ago. And unfortunately, it's just going to come now. And they're going to have to look themselves in the mirror and have to come out a different team at the other end of this bye week if they want to be competing into mid-January, which right now it's not looking like that's going to be the case. But if that want that to be the case, then they're going to have to make a serious turnaround. And at the end of the day, it's just it hurts to see a team that clearly had so much promise through the first 3 games of the season, Corbin, be sort of crumbling like this purely because of their own mistakes. And it's just every single week it's happening over and over and over again, especially at home. And you have the narrative that Lumen Field is losing its home field advantage for the Seahawks. And Geno Smith talks about it after last week, the fact that it felt like partially a road game versus Buffalo. And then the fans show up this game. They're in it. The fans are in it. You can hear them. Even on the TV broadcast, you can hear them in it. And it doesn't make a difference. And it's brutal for a team that's trying to get on track right now. And it just has not all come together. And I don't know what they're going to have to do during the bye week, but something is going to have to change if they want to turn this season around.
Yeah, it's really frustrating when you see the same things happening week in and week out, and they keep saying they're going to fix them, and then they're not getting fixed. They keep making the undisciplined mistakes that you can't have as a team that has playoff aspirations. The crazy thing is this division is so tight-knit that even at 4-5, they are still very much alive. If they can come out of the bye week and they can get rolling, this is still a division that is up for grabs. But you're now 0-2 in the division. You're 1-4 against conference foes. I mean, this is going to be a really tough hole for them to dig out of that they have put themselves in. And so they've got to do a lot of self-reflection here and try to figure out how they can fix these things that just continue to crop up week in and week out. When we come back, I know it was a loss in overtime, but there's still standouts that we need to reward. We've got game balls, offense, defense, and special teams. We'll get to those coming up next here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can bet on everything from Zach Charbonnet scoring a rushing touchdown against the 49ers after Seattle's bye week, or you could have DK Metcalf being the first player with a 30-plus yard reception coming off an injury. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, going live here from Lumen Field. Glad to be teaming up, as always, for our post-game show with my co-host, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, win or lose. We love to have your unwavering support here on the podcast. Unfortunately, we have to dive into a loss, but let's take some positive spins now. It's time for our weekly game balls. And I'm glad that you pointed this out earlier, because it's so easy to look at a game like this. And don't get me wrong, there were so many negatives. There's a reason you lost this football game. And I'm with Geno Smith. I'm not a believer in moral victories, especially in professional sports. You won or you lost. But there were positives coming out of this game. And we got to start on offense. Look, you and I try to give separate game balls every week on offense, defense, special teams, but Jackson Smith-Njigba, he should have had 260 receiving yards in this game. He had a couple of huge plays that were taken away from penalties from the offensive line. He still finished with 180 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, including the game-tying one at the end of regulation. Yes, he had a drop that led to an interception for Geno Smith in the first quarter, but I think he more than amended for that with this career day, with a career high in receptions, career high in touchdown receptions, and really helped this team offset DK Metcalf's departure, his absence with his injury, much better than he did a week ago against the Buffalo Bills.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I mean, when we're looking at last week, Corbin, I think, we talked about JSN a good bit, but I expected more out of JSN in the Bills game. And I think we saw him fill that sort of wide receiver one role in this game that we were expecting to see last week. And this is why you pick a guy, number 20 overall, because you want to see him have a game like this. And Geno Smith talked about it after the game. JSN played a great game. Geno was extremely disappointed in himself with how well some of, his teammates played. And I think, even though he didn't explicitly name drop Jackson in that particular comment, I think he was probably talking about Jackson Smith-Njigba just with how well he played, how frequently he was open, Corbin. He was constantly creating space from defenders and everything else that you need in a passing game without DK Metcalf, because we saw last week how limited this offense can be whenever their vertical threat is gone. Just really pleased to see Jackson step up in this one. And I think this will become one of those games where after this season, going into next season, whenever you're looking at how this receiving core is made up, when you're trying to figure out who's going to be your key pieces, they're going to be able to fall back on this game and some of the film that Jack's put down today in terms of this is a guy who can really step up when we need him to.
And what really excited me about this performance, we have seen, and last year it was frustrating as heck to watch Shane Waldron and all the short routes that he was running with Jackson Smith and Jigba, and believing that he can be more of a factor downfield. That's what he was today. And even when you take out the 40-yard catch that was wiped out by a holding penalty on rookie Mike Jarrell, he had two huge ones today, unfortunately. But even when you take that play out, there was a 47-yard catch on a corner route after Reek Woolen's interception late in the second quarter that led to a touchdown for Jack Smith and Jigba going across the middle. He got open in the middle of the end zone, 24-yarder. Bang, bang, 2 20-plus yard receptions. He had a couple other big plays late in the game that set up the final touchdown drive, final touchdown, which who was on the receiving end of that? It was Jackson Smith and Jigba, and he was able to hold on with a defender coming in and whacking him right after catching the football on a corner route. So I thought this was one of those stepping stone games for a guy that I still believe has the chance to be a real star in this league. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate that this happened in a loss. And as he said, he would rather win and not have the stats. But look, the Seahawks wouldn't have been in a position to win this game, especially with the turnovers they had, if not for the heroics of Jackson Smith and Jigba. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, you and I actually have dramatically different takes on this one. So we each have our own game balls here. I'm going to go to the linebacker position. And last week, Ernest Jones actually got the game ball from you, albeit with the defense not really having anybody that deserved a game ball the way they played. But this week, it feels like Ernest Jones absolutely deserves that game ball. Why do you think the Rams ran for 2.8 yards per carry in this game? Number 13 was a big part of it. And there's one play in particular that jumped out to me. It was one of those in the press box. We're not allowed to cheer or shout in the press box. That was one that made me want to cheer. And it was late in the third quarter, the second scoring drive the Rams had. They were down at the 1 yard line. They were ready to punch it in and take the lead. And we got to see Ernest Jones like a heat-seeking missile. He immediately read the play. He got downhill, shot through the line, and hit his former teammate Kyron Williams for a 2-yard loss. And a couple plays later, it was a field goal attempt. That would have been a touchdown without that particular stop, driving him back a couple yards. He had a couple other run stops. There was a near interception that, in his defense, the ball was tipped, and these guys are not receivers. Those are really hard passes to bring in, but he almost had a pick on Matthew Stafford. I thought Ernest Jones played a fantastic game. He looked a lot more comfortable out there. And if you're looking for a silver lining coming out of this game, I think that you can have sustained success being better against the run with number 13 in the middle of your defense. It was proven today why they made the trade for him.
Yeah, there's few critiques that I can have of Ernest Jones in this game, Corbin. And I think he really, really played well. That particular play that you were talking about, Corbin, I tweeted immediately. I'm like, this is the type of linebacker just reads decision-making and just act on it type of plays that Seattle has been looking for all season. That's why they traded for him. And again, I mean, we know Les Snead was never going to trade Ernest Jones in division, but the fact that Seattle was able to land him mid-season, it is a huge boost to this defense, and you can just see the confidence that Ernest Jones plays with. It has not wavered. Not last week, even when he had 3 days of practice, 4 days with the team, and then leading into the game, and then not this week whenever he had a whole week under his belt and able to get going. He just continued to play free, and he's a huge, I hate to say upgrade over another player because I just think that kind of demeans the other player. But look, at the end of the day, he's playing better than Jerome Baker was, and I think he's going to be a huge staple for this team going forward. But on my side, Corbin, I was just a big fan of what Leonard Williams was doing for this defense all game long. Obviously, it didn't show up big in the stat sheets, but 5 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and then he obviously had a team-high 2 QB hits. It was a little bit of a rough day for the pass rush overall, Corbin. No sacks, and this pass rush has already been in the bottom half of the NFL in terms of pressure to sack ratio, which is not great. But all day, Leonard Williams was splitting double teams. He was getting into the backfield. He was getting in position to make those plays. He just wasn't able to finish them. But really, nobody on Seattle's defense was constantly finishing those plays in the backfield, other than at least on Matthew Stafford. There was obviously some tackles for loss and things like that. But Matthew Stafford, as we know, is great avoiding the rush. But overall, it's one of those games, Corbin, where I look at it and I see a veteran on Seattle's defense, and it's a good reminder as to why they picked up Leonard Williams, because he is one of the biggest pieces on this defense in terms of both stopping the run, getting those interior pass rushes, and I was just satisfied with what I saw from Leonard Williams today.
And flipping over to special teams, we've had a hard time some games this year coming up with a game ball winner. This is the exact opposite. Like Cody White, what a performance in his 2024 debut. He blocked a punt, and unfortunately that led to Geno Smith's second interception shortly after. And that one was more defendable just because it looked like A.J. Barner got hung up by a defensive lineman on that play. It just was a funky play from the outset. But nonetheless, that was set up, that opportunity to score by Cody White coming in and blocking a punt. And oh, by the way, he had 2 catches for 44 yards on offense. I know this is special teams game ball, but look, all-around performance. He also drew a defensive pass interference penalty on one of Seattle's big drives late in the game. So this kid, every time that he had a chance to step up, he came through with big plays. And it stinks that the play that he got a 16-yard reception happened right before Geno Smith's first red zone interception. It's unfortunate that happened, but every time that this kid had an opportunity to make a play today, whether it was on special teams or offense, he came through. This might have been the most complete special teams performance we've seen from a Seahawk this year. And so it was really exciting to see a practice squad guy. And this is kind of becoming a trend with Seattle. These practice squad guys getting their opportunities and fully seizing them, showing that they want to play on Sundays.
I really am almost viewing it, Corbin, like a just sort of all-around game ball in terms of Cody White. Like, talk about a guy who gets called up from the practice squad and has not played in an NFL game since 2022 and comes up with a couple of the plays that you just talked about, Corbin, getting the pass interference call and then immediately having his first catch since November 28th of 2022 when he was a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just awesome for the guy. And then again, obviously Geno has his red zone interception, and then Cody White comes right back with the block punt. I mean, if you're going to have – I haven't seen a better practice squad elevation in quite some time at this point, Corbin. That was an incredible performance from him. If you want one guy to come up and make some plays for you, I think at this point, Cody White's going to be their guy.
All right, let's flip the script now. As we do each and every week here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks, we have got our 3-up, 3-down stock watch, the players that shined even in defeat and the players who are going to be looking to bounce back after the bye week and play better than they did today. Let's start on the 3-up spectrum. And Tyler Lockett, I'm just going to say this. We have been waiting for him to have a vintage Tyler Lockett game, and it hasn't happened. It didn't happen last week. He had 1 catch for 9 yards without DK Metcalf, and that was not acceptable. And early on in this game, he was not getting involved, but ended up catching a 30-yard touchdown. That was the first score the Seahawks had, and got to almost 90 receiving yards in this game. So let's give the game ball, not the game ball, but we'll give the 3-up, the first nod here to Tyler Lockett. You couldn't give it to anybody but Jack Smith-Njigba for the game ball. But as far as another player on offense that really stepped up with DK Metcalf being out, you got some big plays today from Tyler Lockett that we have not necessarily seen this year from the veteran receiver. And so, to me, this is easy. The only other offensive player away from JSN that deserves props in my mind is Tyler Lockett, who had a pretty strong day here in Week 9.
We did need to see a kind of a vintage performance out of Tyler Lockett today, Corbin. And I think we did get that, especially going 1 for 3 on his targets last week for just 9 yards. It was disappointing, and he wasn't really getting much separation against the Buffalo Bills defenders last week, Corbin. Like, we can't, that was tight coverage. And at the end of the day, that's the way the NFL is sometimes, right? Like, sometimes you get shut down, especially without DK Metcalf as a decoy. It makes things a whole lot tougher. And I think that was, again, back to the JSN thing. Like, that's why we wanted to see these receivers break out today. And both of Seattle's top receivers who we expected to have good games did. And I think Tyler Lockett we don't know what his future is beyond this season, whether or not he's going to hang it up, whether or not the Seahawks want to do something else, at the receiver position. But one of these games is the reminder of Tyler Lockett is always going to be there. He's always going to be a safe target whether or not that means he's going to get a whole lot of yards after the catch, he's going to get a touchdown, or he's just going to sit down and make sure he protects his body. But that touchdown was beautiful. It sparked the offense, Corbin, and I think that was huge for the rest of the game, even though it didn't end up in a win for the team today.
Going to the defensive side of the ball, look, we got to have mostly defense focused here because the defense gave up 13 points in regulation to the Rams. The defense played really good football in the first 4 quarters, and unfortunately you have that game-ending touchdown, the one-handed grab by Demarcus Robinson that kind of sullied it a little bit. But the defense played lights out, particularly in the first half. They forced 4 punts. They forced an interception for Reek Woolen. And I think a player who, if you look at the stat line, isn't going to jump out, but if you watch the game, you know the impact that Byron Murphy II had in this game. He had a tackle for loss. He had 5 tackles, or actually 6 tackles in the game, but it felt like he was consistently collapsing the pocket. There were several times in the first half in particular that Matthew Stafford had to bail out to his right, and it was because number 91 was creating havoc in the interior. And so you got the penetration as a pass rusher. He was making plays as a run defender. He was gobbling up double teams, allowing the linebacker stay clean. Ernest Jones, for example. I just thought Byron Murphy II had a really good game that might not necessarily be reflected if you're just looking at stat lines. But in terms of his impact, he was a big component for holding the Rams under 70 rushing yards in this game. And he sped up the clock for Matthew Stafford several times in this game, which was part of the reason he completed less than 60% of his passes.
Yeah, in terms of rookie defenders and just defensive interior linemen in general, Corbin, we've seen that Byron Murphy is already becoming one of the more heavily double-team players in the NFL, and he's having some bad. I mean, obviously last week wasn't his best performance. I think we had him even on the down last week, Corbin. But the fact that he was able to bounce back, have a really solid game, the entire interior of the defensive line for the Seahawks played really, really well today, especially in the run game and just getting interior pressure. And I think Byron Murphy is just a standout. And the fact that you have a rookie who can struggle a little bit in one game and immediately come back the next game and find the mental fortitude to hold his gaps. And this is what Leonard Williams was talking about during the week, Corbin, is you have the discipline, the gap discipline has been brutal for this team. And Byron Murphy was sound on almost every single play that I saw. There may have been 1 or 2 where he got out-leveraged just a tad. But overall, that's one of the things that you're looking at when you want to see building blocks for a rookie. And Byron Murphy checked all those boxes today. And one of the other guys we've got to talk about on the defensive side, Corbin, as you know, is Kobe Bryant. And this is a guy who's been just rising these last few games. Had the huge hit towards the end of the game to jar it loose and obviously get things back in Seattle's favor. And overall, I was just really satisfied with the way he's been playing both in coverage and run defense. This guy has been somebody who's actually becoming an impact player for the Seahawks.
Yeah, he has been an impact defender since replacing Rayshawn Jenkins. And I actually briefly thought about him for game ball on defense. That's the kind of impact he's had. He had a pass breakup in the end zone, second straight week that he's done that. That ball was popped up and nearly got intercepted by a teammate. I believe Julian Love was the one that got really close to getting underneath it. And then he had that big hit on Demarcus Robinson that they actually threw a flag on it. And we were all talking about it in the press box, like, you cannot throw a flag on that at this juncture of the game. It was a clean hit, knocked the ball out of Demarcus Robinson's hands there. And that's what led to overtime. Because the Rams, if they would have gotten that play there and, it's a spot foul, that would have been a field goal range spot. We might not have even gone to overtime. So that was a huge play for him. I love what I'm seeing toughness-wise coming up in the run game. He made some nice plays, contributing to limiting Kyron Williams and Blake Corum in this game. So I just think he continues to play at a really high level. And safety, it looks like it's a position that he's feeling pretty comfortable with. And so they're going to have an interesting decision to make when Rayshawn Jenkins comes back healthy in a few weeks, because Kobe Bryant's going to be hard to pull from the lineup with the way that he is playing right now. Okay, on the flip side, the Seahawks lose by 6 in overtime, so there certainly are some negatives. And look, we see the comments, we read them. Look, I have been as big of a Geno Smith defender as anyone out there, and I'm still going to be bullish on some things here when I'm assessing his play today. But there's no denying the 2 red zone interceptions were an absolute disaster. And you cannot do that, especially the first one. You cannot throw that football. Just take the sack. You cannot throw that ball. I know there was pressure bearing down. I know his arm got hit. Second one, your intended receiver gets hung up. borderline held there. There's some factors there. The first interception was not his fault. That ball was right in Jackson Smith and Jigba's hands, and he just didn't catch it. But you need your starting quarterback to play better in the red zone than what you had there. Those were crucial mistakes. I thought he amended for it to an extent. That last drive was amazing. He went right down the field, big play to JSN, gets a touchdown to JSN in the corner, and he makes some of those spectacular throws, but there's just too many of these killer mistakes that are happening. And in this particular game, Connor, I cannot give him the benefit of the doubt. I think that those, and he took it afterwards. He apologized to the fan base and his teammates for his performance. He's got to do that. And, this is not just owning it up to the quarterback. Those are mistakes you cannot make in critical situations that ultimately gave the Rams this win.
Yeah, it's so difficult, Corbin. I was like, before that last touchdown drive to force overtime, I'm like, I was as low on Geno as I've been since he became the starter, right? Like I was borderline like, we might need to put Sam Howell in to finish the game, right? Like just maybe just give him a break. Let him sit on the sideline and kind of get his head straight and just see what we're going to do here. Did I ever land on that conclusion? I don't think so. But then he comes back and has a couple of the most elite throws I've seen out of him to force that touchdown. Obviously, he has the 29-yarder to JSN, and then again with the 14-yard touchdown pass at the end of the game in regulation. A couple of the best throws I've seen him make as a Seahawk. And this is what we get with Geno Smith, where a lot of the interceptions he's had this season, Corbin, you're right, are not his fault. And it's been difficult to try and balance, like, how well is Geno Smith playing with, like, how unfortunate some of the bounces have been, right, against him in terms of both whether it's a drop pass that becomes an interception or whether it's him getting hit as a result of his offensive line completely breaking down and allowing him less than 2 seconds to throw the football. So it's so difficult to grade how well Geno Smith is actually playing behind this offensive line. And I think that's what makes it so tough, because when you look at his stat line, it's not great, right? But it's like he's going to probably command, some money after this year, and that's understandable. And the Seahawks are going to have a tough decision to make if he doesn't just absolutely light it up the rest of the season, which I think he has the potential to do, and he says he's going to do. But there's just so many unknowns right now. And I think this was, again, one of the worst games I've seen out of him, especially just in terms of consecutive drives throwing those red zone interceptions. Those cannot happen. But it's brutal. It's brutal. And it's so hard to assess. And that's really where I come down on it. As a legitimate Geno defender, I am conflicted, Corbin.
Yeah, one thing I'm not conflicted on, the play at right guard. And I know that the Seahawks, they made the decision this week. We want continuity. So Anthony Bradford is going to be our full-time starter. Christian Haynes didn't even dress today. They didn't even suit him up as a healthy scratch, which that made absolutely no sense to me, that you go from platooning these guys to, we're not even going to play Christian Haynes. But I think you got to reopen this again. They just don't have an answer right now at right guard. I mean, Anthony Bradford, one of the sacks that I had him credited for, going back and watching, it was a twist stunt, and Mike Jarrell did not pick it up. So that one really is on Mike Jarrell. But he had two other plays where Braden Fisk just dominated him at the point of attack, and it almost looked like he was playing patty cake with him. And Fisk just went right by him and got to Geno Smith. One of them led to a sack for one of Fisk's teammates. And you also had two penalties. You had a holding penalty, false start penalty against number 75. He now has 9 penalties this season. I'm not a believer in piling on, but what did he do that was positive in today's game? I going back and watching the film, maybe there was a couple run blocks that stood out, but he struggled mightily in pass protection, and that continues to be the biggest, weakest link for Seattle's offensive line, is that right guard spot. Geno Smith under duress with the interior pressure coming after him all game long, the penalties, not being consistent in the run game. I know they were trying to get continuity, but I don't know how you reach the conclusion that this job had been won by Anthony Bradford. I really don't.
Yeah, the only time I've really seen Anthony Bradford excel, and really impress me, Corbin, is on a couple of the plays, run blocking plays, as you alluded to, where he's a pulling guard, and that's because he's in space. He's using his big body, which we know Anthony Bradford is. He's not the most athletic guy, but he does have a big body. He's getting in space, and he's using his momentum and his weight to move guys around. And that's where we've seen some success for the run game this year. But other than that, in pass protection, I just think he's such a liability in pass protection. And it's partially the whole offensive line, right, Corbin? I mean, 7 sacks allowed today. This is not a premier, at least statistically. I understand there's a lot of talent along that pass rush for the Rams, but statistically to this point in the season, this was not a top-tier pass rush. And 7 sacks on Geno Smith, one of the worst performances for this offensive line so far this year, if not the worst. And it's just baffling how it can only continue to go down. And Anthony Bradford is one of the main reasons that it's doing that. And it's tough to watch, man. It's tough to watch. I think they do need to reopen the competition again. I was just as baffled as you were, Corbin, that you go from platooning these guys to just saying Christian Haynes is not going to play at all today. It's a very weird and sort of volatile reaction to practice. Like, I understand maybe Anthony Bradford had a way better week of practice, but I don't think that means you just scratch Christian Haynes depending on how well Bradford's playing in this game. You need to have a backup. You need to have somebody who has experience this season, particularly with this offense. It is puzzling, but I'm honestly tired of talking about the offensive line now, Corbin, and I do want to go to the defense again because obviously Riq Woolen, we all saw the play. He's going to be our last guy on the 3 down here, and we all saw the interception. Great interception by Riq Woolen. He had another one that he should have had there in a crucial time in the game, and he just didn't drive on the ball. He jumped too quick. He missed that one and allowed Demarcus Robinson to step right in front of it. And again, he gave up. I want to see what I need to go back and watch it, but I'm pretty darn sure he gave up 2 touchdowns in this one. One at the beginning of the second half, both of Matthew Stafford's touchdowns. And then obviously we all saw the one at the end of overtime. That was just a blatant – he got torched. And it was a great catch by Demarcus Robinson, but at the end of the day, you expect more out of Riq Woolen.
Yeah, he got beaten both those touchdowns that Matthew Stafford threw to Demarcus Robinson. The one, he got tied into a pretzel by the route that Robinson ran on that 1-yard touchdown at the goal line early in the third quarter. And then the other one, he just flat out got beat. And with his 4.2 speed, he's able to, a lot of times, if he gets beat initially, he's able to recover. But in this particular case, he wasn't able to make up the ground. And Robinson made a tremendous one-handed catch. You know, you can tip your cap to him, but the coverage was not great in that particular case. He got burned, and he missed that opportunity, you said, to jump the ball earlier when he could have had. That was a gimme interception, and he just didn't attack the football, which is not normal for Riq Woolen. Normally, he is a corner that is going to attack the football. So, yeah, it's crazy that a guy that had a key interception that led to a touchdown, that we would have him on this list here, but it was those crucial mistakes at the end. And it's, again, some of this has to do with expectations. This guy is supposed to be an all-pro caliber corner. We see glimpses of it, but then he gave up 2 touchdowns in coverage. He also had a key pass interference penalty was called in that helped extend a drive in the second half as well. So it was a very uneven game with a lot of mistakes for Riq Woolen, and they need more from him as one of their stars in the secondary. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at CJohn Benintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Come up tomorrow, I'll be teaming up with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. We'll have our Monday musings and take a look at where to go from here heading into the bye week for the Seattle Seahawks. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Go Hawks.